What's up guys, Board4 here. Today we're going to be going over the planned July 21st major update for Company of Heroes 2. Now you can read all the details of the update for yourself on the official Company of Heroes 2 changelog form at the link I have posted in the description below. However, I would really like to emphasize a few of the points that stand out to me and maybe hopefully start a forum for discussion here in the comments below just to hear what you guys all think about the latest update. There really is a massive amount of change being pushed through here to the gameplay mechanics and the tech trees for all four factions actually, so let's get started. Now bear in mind that these most recent changes are primarily as an attempt to balance out the factions in preparation for the up and coming British Forces expansion. Here's a quote from Orca from the official COH2 community forums to that end. Quote, "The primary focus of the July 21st update is to continue the design upgrade of the existing factions to improve the overall balance of all factions in preparation for the introduction of the British Forces. This is the second phase migration of changes seen in the British Forces Alpha. The next update will be on September 3rd, which will introduce the British Forces content." So there you have it. Sega has apparently seen the need to attempt a rebalance across all four existing factions so that we'll have as close to a level playing ground as possible once the Brits enter the scene. Now before I go into all the details of this major balancing overhaul, I'd like to point out the existence of the tuning pack. Essentially, Sega has released a mod on the Steam Workshop which basically preloads the July 21st updates so that you can try out the new changes firsthand and perhaps even change up your strategy a little bit before everyone else in the community is playing that version of the game on July 21st and onward. And I say version of the game because this update really is extensive, and I can guarantee it will warrant a modification of tactics for almost every serious online player in this community. So, if you want to get a head start in the new update, I strongly encourage you to check this out, and of course, posted a link to that in the description below as well. I'm pleased to say that Sega has, in my opinion at least, really outdone themselves with this update, because not only have they released this tuning pack mod for us anxious COH2 players to begin revamping our strategies early on, but they have taken the feedback from those who have playtested the tuning pack since its release on July 14th, and they added some changes to the balance mod based on the community suggestions. I will include those in my notes at the very end of this video, so stay tuned. So, the goals of this balance update were to increase the number of viable strategies in the game and reduce negative user experiences in gameplay. What this means is that Sega thinks there should be more use of combined arm tactics in the game, as well as a longer core unit / light vehicle battle stage prior to the induction of those medium and heavier armor units in your standard online experience. This also means that Sega has noted a significant amount of complaints from the community on the current state of imbalance and tactics spamming amongst the four existing factions. So far, so good. Now obviously one easy way to make sure that in most games at least players have to use more infantry and light armor tactics longer is to raise the command points necessary to call in medium and heavy armor. Therefore, in light of this, all heavy tanks will get an increase of 2 additional CP points necessary for that commander ability to bring them onto the field. So this includes the Soviet ISU-152, the Soviet IS-2, and the Soviet KV-2 tanks. For the Wehrmacht, those tanks are the Tiger Ace, and the Elephant Tank Destroyer. For Oberkommando West, those tanks are the Sturm Tiger and the Jagd Tiger. All of these will now require an additional 2 command points to unlock from their respective commander trees. In addition to these changes to the heavy unit commander abilities, the following changes have been enacted. Stug-E's will now require 7 command points instead of the previous 6. Pumas will now require only 5 command points as opposed to the original 6. The US M10 Tank Destroyer will now require 8 from the original 7, and for the US, both the Bulldozer Sherman and the M4C Sherman tanks will require 10 command points from the original 9. So as you can see here, commanders calling in that medium to heavy armor will have to rely on lighter armor units, our infantry, for a while longer before they have the command points necessary to bring in the bigger guns. Apparently there was a bug actually which caused certain base buildings to appear through the fog of war so that players might sometimes tell what base structures were being built by the opposing team. I've never experienced it myself, but I didn't really have an eye out for it either. Anyway, this bug will no longer be present as of July 21st. The devs behind this patch made some pretty huge modifications to the tech trees of all 4 existing factions. That's actually the main meat and potatoes of this update. So starting with the Soviets, Sega had this general statement about the changes to the Soviet tech tree, and here it is. Quote, "Tech tree has been adjusted and reformatted to create more diverse and creative strategies with the faction. We felt the Soviet tech tree encouraged a very binary gameplay and created reliance on dispatch abilities. With these changes, we anticipate players will be encouraged to explore new combined arms strategies. So great, you're probably asking, what does this all actually mean? Well, what this means is that they've generally made it easier to construct and utilize the infantry and support units for the Soviet faction, and they made it take a bit more to make use of their Tier 3, Tier 4 units, namely those coming from the Tankovi Battalion Command and the Mechanized Arma Campania. The Special Rifle Command building, Tier 1, now costs 10 less fuel to produce, now at 160 manpower, 40 fuel. The Tankovi Command, which spawns the M5 half-track, T-70, and Su-76 army units, now costs a bit more with 240 manpower, 80 fuel, as opposed to the original 60 fuel. The Mechanized Armor Campania now costs a bit less at 240 manpower, 90 fuel from the original 100 fuel, but take note of this now. Interestingly, you will now be required to have constructed the Tankovi Command first, before you can build this Tier 4 building, the Mechanized Armor Campania. I, for one, will definitely have to rework the way I play the Soviets on account of this change alone. Conscript infantry units will no longer remain dying on the field for 500 seconds, giving a line of sight to the rest of your team whilst they're laying there right on the ground. This patch will reduce the casualty timer for conscript infantry from 500 seconds to the same 30 seconds as all the other infantry for all other factions in the game. The Soviet T-34 and T-76 tanks will now only cost 300 manpower and 80 fuel, as opposed to the original 310 manpower, 100 fuel. Do keep in mind, though, that the Mechanized Armor Campania needed to buy these tanks is more expensive than before. Also, T-34 and T-85s will no longer be brought into the battlefield as a commander call-in ability, but will instead be medium tanks which can be purchased at the Mechanized Armor Campania, so long as the player does have a commander active which has the ability to call in the T-34s and the T-85s in the first place. So basically, it's changed it from being an active call-in armor to the field ability to a passive unlock for the Mechanized Armor Campania. The M5 half-track can now upgrade to the quad cannon regardless of the previously necessary veterancy requisites, which means as soon as you get that M5 on the field, you can equip it with the quad cannon. The Maxim heavy machine gun team will now be more effective at countering masses of infantry, as their nearby suppression multiplier has been doubled from 0.4 to 0.8. The Soviet M2152 artillery now has 8 salvos from the original 4 salvos, but can no longer perform precision artillery strikes. Also at Veterancy 1, the M2152s will now acquire an additional 2 salvos per attack. So done with the Soviets, we're going to move on now to the United States forces and the changes enacted on their tech trees. First off, the bar and bazooka weapon rack upgrades have been combined into one upgrade, so that infantry can now either equip bars or bazookas after purchasing that single weapon rack upgrade from HQ. The major unit will now cost 30 more fuel to produce in order to discourage medium armor from entering the field earlier on. The captains, on the other hand, will now cost 20 less fuel, so basically more advanced infantry and light armor will be easier to buy earlier on in the game now. Pack howitzers now cost 100 less manpower at 380 from 480, and they also will cost 50% less manpower to reinforce the lost crewmen in the team. Also, just like the T-34, T-76s from the Soviets, the US Sherman EZ-8 medium call-in tanks will no longer be deployed to the battlefield as a commander call-in ability, but instead will be purchased from the battalion command post after the major has been purchased. Also, like the Soviets, this will only be an option for those who have a commander who originally had the Sherman EZ-8 on call as an active commander ability. So again, it's just changing those from an active call-in to a passive unlock. Also, that passive unlock does not require any command points. As soon as you choose that commander, you will have the ability to produce that armor unit. So lastly, for the US forces, the P-47 Rocket Strike commander ability, that radius for the rocket strike has been reduced from 60 to 50, making it easier to avoid staying in the kill zone with a bit of micromanaging. Moving on to the Axis now, the Oberkommando West Sturmtiger has been removed from the core tree and added to the Elite Armor tree, while the Panzer IV AUSF-J has been added to the Schwerpanzer headquarters. Also, the Panzer IV has been buffed, now starting out with side skirts and stats identical to all other Panzer IV medium tanks, so it's a bit better. This is all in an attempt to encourage Oberkommando West players to use more general-purpose medium armor before they bring in the really heavy tanks. The formidable Sturmtiger has also been buffed with substantial penetration, range, area effect penetration, and damage at a far range increases to make up for its lack of auto-fire capability. It has also been made easier to gain veterancy. The heavily relied upon stern pioneers have been made a bit less expensive to reinforce, from 40 to 32 manpower per soldier. Also, the reinforcing time has been reduced by 20%. This will allow Oberkommando players to get those crucial frontline troops back into the fight much quicker. Finally, the infantry support gun has been reduced in cost from 430 to 330 to make up for its underperformance in the field. Moving on lastly to the Wehrmacht, one major change which most players will notice almost immediately is that the Wehrmacht now starts out with 420 manpower as opposed to the usual 360. This 60 manpower boost is to compensate for the lack of starting base infantry and also to give more options for diversity in early game building for Wehrmacht players. Another major game changer for the Wehrmacht is the battle phases department. Here's another quote from the COH2 forums from one of the devs. Quote, "One of the design goals for the Wehrmacht was to give the faction flexibility in which they could tech. However, that was not the case due to the expensive nature of their battle phases. By offsetting the cost to the buildings instead of the upgrades, it gives players an easier time to upgrade through battle phases. So basically, they've drastically reduced the cost of upgrading battle phases, but on the other hand, they also significantly increased the price of newer tech buildings after that Tier 1 infantry company. Grenadier units can no longer use the Veterancy Level 2 max range modifier to lob rifle grenades at such a distance as which would cause detonation of the grenade upon impact, which means that opposing troops will now have some time to react to the grenade landing in their proximity. And another really game-changing modification, the bread and butter MG42 heavy machine gun team can now be purchased directly from the German HQ for the new price of 260 manpower. Now this is 20 more than the original price, and the build time has also been increased by 6 seconds to 36 seconds, but this will allow Wehrmacht players to get these staple machine guns out to the front line faster than ever before. Panzerwerfer rocket batteries now gain veterancy 20% faster. Both the anti-infantry and anti-tank strafes from the Stuka Ju-87D now take 1.5 seconds longer to recharge. The redistribute resource ability now only gives 125 munitions as opposed to the original 150. Also, the command tank unit defense bonuses are no longer dependent on the terrain being controlled by the friendly team, but instead will now be radius based, meaning that nearby units to the command tank will benefit from the tank's abilities regardless of who owns the territory. And last but not least, the LEFH 105 artillery unit will now have an additional 4 salvos per fire at 10 from the original 6. This is a lot like the Soviet ML-20 buff that those Soviets are getting. This concludes the official balancing changes that have been released so far. Real quickly, I want to go over the additions to the balance preview mod that have been enacted very recently, just in response to the community feedback from players playing this early version of the July 21st update. I want to say that as a caveat that it is not clear to me from the wording on the forums whether or not these changes to the mod will be included in the official update. All it says is, quote, "Few more changes being added to balanced preview mod today from your feedback," end quote. So what does this mean? Does this mean that these will only be changes to the mod but not necessarily to the official version of the update? That wouldn't make too much sense to me, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, these changes are as follows. Riflemen, Volksgrenadiers, conscripts, and grenadiers will now all receive construction penalty modifiers, which means that they're penalized for constructing defenses whilst in combat. The Soviet sandbags' health has been reduced from 500 to 110. The SDKFZ 221 Scout Car is now called the SDKFZ 222 Scout Car. Amazing. It will now come with the KWK 30 2 centimeter autocannon by default, and it will cost 230 manpower and 20 fuel as opposed to the original 210 manpower 15 fuel. Also, the Wehrmacht's Battle Phase 3 cost has been reduced still further from 200 manpower 50 fuel to 200 manpower 45 fuel. The Heavy Panzer Corps now costs 5 less fuel. The Soviet PTRS rifle now does 27 damage instead of 40 damage, but it does 13 bonus damage to vehicles, so sorry Guards Rifle fans, it's not going to be quite as effective as it was before, especially against infantry. Finally, the SDK FZ 251 or 252 half-tracks no longer require Battle Phase 2 before Wehrmacht players can upgrade her with the flame projector. That's all for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Once again, this is a massive rebalance. I strongly encourage you all to start thinking about how these new changes will affect your tactics. I also encourage you to read the changelog yourself at the link I posted in the description below, as there are a few bug fixes and a couple other small details which I left out. As always, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, And for all things Company Heroes, stay tuned to my channel for more updates. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next episode.